So hello and welcome back yet again to Alice's Great Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, where Alice is definitely having trippy adventures through Wonderland, that is for sure. No open window today because Mother Nature has decided to turn the chill chest back on a little bit and give us actually the weather that we're supposed to be having this season. So I'm back to long sleeves and the heat kicked on last night. Also, I'm a little worried that I planted out too soon, but I didn't plant anything delicate. And the most delicate thing that I planted out got dug up last night by something. I had two corn seedlings that we started inside, and they were about 4 inches tall, and I planted them in my corn bed along with other seed corn to see which way was the best way to do it. And I just went out there and they were dug up. They didn't even eat them. They just dug them up. I'm so offended, but that's on me because I didn't put a fence around it. This too shall pass. You know, if we don't get corn this year, that's okay. We've got Brussels sprouts and all sorts of other things that haven't been dug up. But the corn got dug up. And that's a tragedy. Not as big of a tragedy as that last chapter with that pig baby. That was a true tragedy. And the Mad Tea Party was just a little bit mad. There was no unbirthday song, though. I was kind of looking forward to that whole Merry Unbirthday song. Maybe it'll come later. I do remember that from the Disney movie. It might have been a Disney invention, though. I don't know. We're discovering it as we go, as we jump back in to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, with Chapter 8, The Queen's Croquet Ground. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this a very curious thing, and she went closer to watch them, and just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, "Look out now! 5! Don't go splashing paint over me like that!" "Couldn't help it," said 5 in a sulky tone. 7 jogged my elbow. Upon which 7 looked up and said, "That's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others." "You'd better not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say only yesterday that you deserve to be beheaded." "What for?" said the one who had spoken first. "None of your business, 2, said 7. "Yes, it is his business," said 5, "and I'll tell him. It was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." 7 flung down his brush and had just begun, "Well, of all the unjust things," when his eyes chanced to fall upon Alice as she stood watching them, and he checked himself suddenly. The others looked round also, and all of them bowed down low. Would you tell me, please," said Alice, a bit timidly, "why you are painting those roses?" 5 and 7 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice, "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake. And if the Queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. So you see, miss, we're doing our best afore she comes to—" At this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" And the 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat on their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked round, eager to see the Queen. And we have a picture. I'm trying to make sure I get it in the right spot. There we go. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. These were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next came 10 courtiers. These were ornamented all over with diamonds and walked 2 and 2 as the soldiers did. After this came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came jumping merrily along hand in hand, in pairs of 2. They were all ornamented with hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the White Rabbit. It was talking in a hurried, nervous manner, smiling at everything that was said, and went by without seeing her. Then followed the Knave of Hearts, carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion. And last of all in this grand procession came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was rather doubtful whether she ought not lie down on her face like the gardeners, but she could not remember ever having heard of such a rule at processions. And besides, she thought, what would be the use of such a procession if people all had to lie down on their faces so they couldn't see it? So she stood where she was and waited. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her, and the Queen said severely, "Who is this?" She said this to the Knave of Hearts, who only bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot!" said the Queen, tossing her head impatiently, and turning to Alice, she said, "What is your name, child?" "My name is Alice, so please your Majesty," said Alice very politely. But she thought to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the Queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying around the rose tree, for, you see, as they were lying on their faces, and the pattern on their backs was the same as the rest of the pack, she could not tell whether they were gardeners or soldiers or courtiers or even 3 of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's no business of mine." The Queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, began screaming, "Off with her head! Off with—" "Nonsense," said Alice, loudly and decidedly, and the Queen fell silent. The King laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she is only a child." The Queen turned angrily away from him and said to the Knave, "Turn them over!" And the Knave did, carefully, with one foot. "Get up!" said the Queen in a shrill, loud voice, and the 3 gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the King, to the Queen, to the royal children, and to everybody else. "Leave off that!" screamed the Queen. "You make me giddy." And then turning to the rose tree, she said, "What have you been doing there?" "May it please your Majesty," said Two in a humble tone, going down on one knee as he spoke, "we were trying—" "I see," said the Queen, who had in this time been examining the roses. "Off with their heads!" And the procession moved along, 3 of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You won't be beheaded," said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot that was standing nearby. The 3 soldiers wandered around for a minute or 2, looking for them, and then quietly marched off after the others. "Are their heads off?" shouted the Queen. "Their heads are gone, if you please, your Majesty," the soldiers shouted. "That's right," shouted the Queen. Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent, and they looked at Alice, since the question was obviously meant for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," roared the Queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering what was going to happen next. It's a very fine day," said a timid voice at her side. Oh, wrong voice. This is the rabbit. It's a very fine day," said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the white rabbit, who was peering anxiously into her face. "Very," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the rabbit in a low, quick tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then he raised himself on tiptoe, put his mouth close to Alice's ear, and whispered, "She's under a sentence of execution." "What for?" "Did you say what a pity?" said the rabbit. "No, I didn't," said Alice. "I don't think it's at all a pity. I said what for." "She boxed the Queen's ears," began the rabbit. Alice gave a little loud scream of laughter. "Oh, hush!" the rabbit whispered. "The Queen will hear you. You see, she came rather late, and the Queen said—" "Get to your places!" shouted the Queen in a voice of thunder, and people began running in all directions, tumbling up against each other. However, they all got settled down in a minute or two, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet ground in all of her life. It was all ridges and furrows. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make arches. The chief difficulty, Alice found at first, was managing her flamingo. She succeeded in getting its body tucked away comfortably enough under her arm with its legs hanging down, but generally, just as she had gotten its neck nicely straightened out and was going to give the hedgehog a knock on the head, it would twist itself around and look up in her face with such a puzzled expression that she couldn't help bursting out laughing. And when she got its head down, she was beginning again. It was all very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unrolled and was in the act of crawling away. And besides all of this, there was generally a ridge or a furrow in the way wherever she wanted to send the hedgehog to, and as the doubled-up soldiers were always getting up and walking off to other parts of the ground, Alice soon came to the conclusion that this was a very difficult game indeed. I can't imagine playing a game of golf with a hedgehog for a ball. I guess it's not golf, it's croquet. But still, it's a little bit much. The players all played at once without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while and fighting for the hedgehogs, and in a very short time the Queen was in a furious passion and went stomping about shouting, "Off with his head!" or "Off with her head!" about once a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy. To be sure, she had not as yet had any dispute with the Queen, but she knew it might happen at any moment, and then she thought, what's going to become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is there's anyone left alive. She was looking around for some way of escape and wondering whether she could get away without being seen when she noticed something curious in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin, and she said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I'll have someone to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat, as soon as there was a mouth enough for it to speak with. Alice waited until its eyes appeared, and then she nodded. "It's no use speaking to it," she thought, "till its ears have come, or at least one." In another moment, the whole head appeared, and then Alice put down her flamingo and began telling it about the game, feeling very glad she had someone to listen to her. The cat seemed to think there was enough of it now in sight, and no more appeared. "I don't think they play at all fairly," said Alice in a complaining tone. "And they all quarrel so dreadfully that one can't hear yourself speak. And they don't seem to have any rules in particular. At least, if there are rules, no one listens to them. And you have no idea how confusing it is, all the things being alive. For instance, there's the arch. I've got to go through next, walking around at the other end of the ground. And I should have croqueted the Queen's hedgehog just now, but it ran away when it saw mine coming." "How do you like the Queen?" said the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," said Alice. "She's so extremely—" Just then she noticed the Queen was close behind her listening, so she went, "Likely to win. It's hardly worth finishing the game." The Queen smiled and moved on. "Who are you talking to?" said the King, coming up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with curiosity. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat," said Alice. "Allow me to introduce it." "I don't like the look of it at all," said the King. "However, it may kiss my hand if it would like." "I'd rather not," said the cat. "Don't be impertinent," said the King, "and don't look at me like that." He hid behind Alice as he spoke. And we have a picture of the King and the Queen and the cat. "A cat may look like a king," said Alice. "I've read that a cat may look at a king in some book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the King decidedly. And he called to the Queen, who was passing at that moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The Queen only had one way of settling all of her difficulties, large or small. "Off with his head," she said without even looking around. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," said the King, and he hurried off. Alice thought that she might as well go back and see how the game was getting on, as she heard the Queen's voice in the distance screaming in passion. She had already heard her sentence 3 more players to be executed for having missed their turns, and she didn't like the look of things at all. As the game was in such confusion, she never knew whether it was her turn or not. So she went off searching for a hedgehog. Her hedgehog was engaged in a fight with another hedgehog who seemed to Alice an excellent opportunity to croquet one of them with the other. The only difficulty was that her flamingo had gone across to the other side of the garden, where Alice could see it trying in a helpless kind of way to fly up into a tree. By the time she caught the flamingo and brought it back, the hedgehog fight was over, and both of the hedgehogs were out of sight. "Doesn't matter much," thought Alice, "as all the arches are gone from this side of the ground." So she tucked her flamingo away under her arm so it didn't escape again, and went back to have a little more conversation with her friend. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to find quite a large crowd gathered around it. There was a dispute going on between the executioner, the King, and the Queen, who were all talking at once, while everyone else was quite silent and looking quite uncomfortable. The minute Alice appeared, she was appalled by all 3, or appealed to by all 3 to settle the question, and they repeated their arguments to her, though, as they were all speaking at once, she found it very hard to make out what they were saying. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off of, that he had never had to do such a thing before, and he wasn't going to begin at this time in his life. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded, and that the executioner should not talk nonsense. And the queen's argument was that if something wasn't done about it, in less than no time at all, she was going to have everyone executed. All of them, all around. It was that last remark that had made everyone look so grave and anxious. Alice could think of nothing else to say, so she said, "It belongs to the Duchess. You better ask her about it." "She's in prison," said the Queen. "Fetch her here." And the executioner went off like an arrow to fetch the Duchess. The cat's head began fading away the moment that he was gone, and by the time he came back with the Duchess, it was entirely disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly around looking for it, while the rest of the party went back to the game of croquet. And that's the end of the chapter. That was a very, very bizarre chapter. Then again, everything in this book, I could say, has been a very, very bizarre chapter. I like the Queen of Hearts, I think, in the Disney movie a little bit better than the drawings over here, although they are very faithfully reproduced cards and a little more practical since they seem so much smaller, so they're actually just a torso. I think in the Disney movie they were like almost down to the ankles. I don't know. I'd have to watch that again. I don't think I've watched Alice in Wonderland, the Disney version, since I was a little kid. I know I've seen the Very Merry Unbirthday song a couple times since then, and maybe the Off with Her Head thing, but it's been a while since I just sat down and watched the whole movie. I should do that at some point. Anyway, that is where we are going to leave it tonight. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed reading it. I hope that it didn't confuse you as much as it confused me. I do still think that my favorite character so far is the Cheshire Cat. I was always torn as a kid between, was the Cheshire Cat my favorite or was the caterpillar my favorite? But I always come down on the side of the cat because, well, because cat. Anyway, thank you for listening. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile and supposedly does something good for the algorithm. And I will see you next time.